officials. My name is Noriyuki SHIKATA, Deputy Cabinet Secretary for Public Relations of the Prime Minister's Office. Today's briefers include Mr. Yoshinori MORIYAMA at the center, Deputy Director General for NISA. And to his right is Mr. Shinichi KAWARADA, Advisor to MEXT. And to his right is Mr. Hiroyuki NISHIURA, Director of International Affairs Office, Staple Food Department of MAFF, and Mr. Kouhei SUGAYA, Deputy Director, Livestock Production and Feed Division, Agricultural Production Bureau of MAFF. And to my left is Mr. Eiichi YOKOTA, Senior Technical Officer of MHLW. And lastly, Mr. Masaru Saito, Assistant Press Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At the outset, I'd like to draw your attention to two documents. One is the PowerPoint titled Government Actions to Ensure the Safety of Beef and Other Food. And the other document is titled Food and Radiation Question and Answer by Consumer Affairs Agency. This document, FAQs by Consumer Affairs Agency, is a translation of the document into English, from Japanese to English, which was published by Consumer Affairs Agency in the beginning of July. And we intend to upload both documents to the English version of Prime Minister's office website. And I would just try to explain some of the salient points of this PowerPoint document. And if you just flip the page, there is a table of contents. We made use of this PowerPoint at the last briefing here at the Foreign Press Center, and we updated and included new developments, and it consists of, as you see, is listed in the table of contents, and updated some of the chronological developments in page 2, including on the 19th of August, temporary release of restrictions on the transfer of cattle fed in Miyagi Prefecture to other prefectures and their shipment to slaughterhouses. And if we move on to the next page, page 3, there is a explanation about the beef cattle safety standards adopted by the Japanese government based on the regulations by ICRP. And there is a standard set for beef, which is a 500 becquerel per kilogram. And as you see in this document, there are different standards used by other countries, including 1,000 in Singapore and Hong Kong, 1,200 in the United States, among others. And there is an equation which is calculating a possible impact on the human body of consuming 1 kilogram of beef containing 500 becquerel, which results in the figure 0.008 millisieverts. And using the same equation with the worst case identified in Japanese beef, so far calculated as 0.007 millisievert. And this compares with the flight from Tokyo to New York, which is about 0.1 millisievert. And the next slide just touches upon issues like biological half-life. In the case of radioactive cesium, the concentration level in the beef cattle falls by half in about 60 days. And the next slide touches upon the shipping restrictions implemented by the Japanese government, including in Fukushima, Miyagi, Iwate, and Tochigi prefecture. This is page 5. And from page 6, there's a explanation about the detailed explanation about the temporary release of restrictions in Miyagi prefecture. And I do not get into details, but the next three pages explain the very detailed plan being implemented by the authorities in Miyagi prefecture. And then I will just skip some of the slides and move on to page 12, where there is a discussion of pork, chicken, and dairy products. And for example, because the pigs and chickens have different digestive organs from cattle, they cannot digest rice straw and pastures and grains, and its byproducts are fed, and rice straw is not fed to pigs and chickens. As for dairy products, it's dairy is D-E-I-R-Y. There has been no cases since March 24 that shipping restrictions imposed on Fukushima and the Ibaraki prefecture. So we have not found any cases in recent months regarding problems surrounding dairy products. And if I just move to the last page, there is a discussion about radioactive substances inspection schemes for rice. And this consists of, just broadly speaking, 3 stages. The rice planting has been restricted in areas with a high concentration of radioactive cesium in the soil in April. And now 2 phases of inspection will be conducted based on the results of soil surveys. This inspection consists of 2 stages, which is a preliminary inspection and main inspection. So there is a very strict the inspections and the regulatory regime installed in terms of rice. And as for the next document by Consumer Affairs Agency, I understand that there is efforts to update, some of the contents, but as of today, this is the document which is valid, and this includes some basic questions, that could be asked, and I hope that this would be of use to you in terms of understanding some of the Japanese government perspectives on the issue relations between food and radiation, especially after 3/11. So I'll just stop here. And on the issue of food safety issues, there could be the further comments from my colleagues from MAFF and MHLW. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Moriyama of NISA to go next.
原子力安全保安の森山です。
I am Moriyama from the Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency, NISA.
お手元に、事故の収束に向けた道筋、ロードマップの進捗状況の資料がございますが、これはロードマップの第2ステップ、7月から始まる第2ステップの最初の1月が終わった段階で、進捗状況を取りまとめたものですが、当初の計画と大きな変更はありませんので、この内容については説明は省略いたします。後で、ご覧いただければと思います。
We have distributed to you a one-page paper entitled Summary of Progress Status of Progress of the Roadmap Towards Restoration from the Accident at Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Station. And this is a summarization of the progress that has been made at the point, which is 1 month after we entered the second stage of the roadmap in July. And since there has been no major changes compared to the initial plan, I would not go into detail, and I would like you to look through the material at when you have the time.
本日は現在取り組んでおります重要な2点について少し状況をご説明いたします。その2点というのは、1つは放出生物によって汚染された対流水の処理の問題、もう1点は現在放出されています放出生物質、原子力発電所から放出されている放出生物質の評価にかかる問題です。
Rather today, I wish to explain the situation regarding two main points that we are now working on. And the two main points would be one, the treatment and disposal of stagnant water that has been contaminated, and two, the assessment of the radioactive material that has been released.
最初の対流水の処理についてですけども、6月から対流水の処理のシステムが稼働しておりますけども、8月にまた新たな通称サリーと呼んでますけども、新たな処理システムが稼働いたしました。これによって全体としての信頼性は高まってきたと考えています。
First, regarding the disposal of the stagnant water. From June, we have had a system in operation, and from August, we have started operation of another new system, which we call by the name SURI. And I believe that through the operation of these systems, there has been a great increase in the reliability of treatment of stagnant water.
しかしながら、この水処理システムが運転を始めて、あまり致命的なトラブルではありませんけども、数多くのトラブルが発生しております。これまでにすでに30件以上のトラブルが発生しています。で、信頼性をこの水処理システムは今後の事故の収束にとって大変重要だと考えておりますので、このトラブルの解決というのが非常に大事だと考えています。
Having said so, however, since the water treatment facility has started operation, we have faced many trouble, although none of them were really critical troubles. But we have experienced more than 30 cases in which we did have some difficulty. And since we consider that the water treatment system is extremely important, we consider it very important that we solve these troubles that we have been facing.
水処理を適切に行うことは冷却をこれから進めていく上でも、原子炉の冷却を進めていく上でも大変重要です。それで原子力安全保安院では東京電力に対して、これまでのトラブルの原因究明、それから再発防止策を検討するように指示をしております。全部解決するというわけにはいかないかも分かりませんけれども、当面8月末を目途に検討していただくということで対応しています。
We consider that for continuing the cooling of the reactors, appropriate water treatment would be extremely important. And therefore, the Nuclear Industrial Safety Agency, NISA, has instructed Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, to consider finding out the causes and also preventing the recurrence of the various troubles that have been experienced so far. And perhaps they may not be able to solve all the troubles that have been experienced so far. We have instructed TEPCO to work on this, aiming at the end of August.
このような対応をしている背景には、事故当初の非常に厳しい緊急時の状況から少しずつ原子炉が安定してきて、むしろいかに信頼性を高めていくか、すなわちさまざまなトラブルを解決して いわゆるトラブルをその水平展開していく、品質保証、QMS を回していく、そういうフェーズに入っているんだろうというふうに考えておりますので、このようなこれまでのトラブルについて、しっかりとした対応を取っていこうと考えているところです。
And the background against these efforts that we are now concentrating on is compared to the challenging emergency situation that we were facing initially, immediately after the accident occurred. We have now gradually come through the stabilization of the reactor, and I think at the phase that we are now in, I believe it would be important how to increase the reliability of the work that we are undertaking. And therefore, that would include, for instance, solving the problems and difficulties that we have been encountering and to enhance the quality of our work. I believe we are in such a phase at the moment, and therefore we would like to make sure that we address and solve the troubles and difficulties that we have been encountering.
それから2つ目の放射性物質の放出状況の評価についてですけれども、東京電力では現在、敷地周辺で、評価しますと年間に、引き直して約 0.4 ミリシーベルトの放出が続いているというふうに評価しています。
Moving on to the second point regarding the assessment of the radioactive material being released. Currently, an assessment of the area surrounding the premises of the TEPCO nuclear power plant shows that converted into annual terms, there continues to be release of radioactive material in the order of 0.4 millisieverts.
しかし東京電力の評価は敷地内の、一つの観測地点によるものでありますので、まだまだ精度が低いと考えています。したがってもう保安院としては東京電力に数多くの、ポイントでの測定を求めています。
This assessment made by Tokyo Electric Power Company is a result of monitoring at one monitoring point, and we consider that for that reason the accuracy is still low. And NISA is requesting TEPCO to undertake the assessment in many monitoring points.
現在東京電力では敷地内で12カ所で、空気中のダストのサンプリング、放射性物質のダストのサンプリングを行っています。それから本日からですけども、原子炉建屋の上部でのダストのサンプリングをクレーンを使って開始をします。
Currently, Tokyo Electric Power Company is sampling radioactive material in the dust in the air in 12 locations in their premises. And also from today, they will be using a crane to obtain samples of dust on the upper part of the reactor building.
それからもう一つ、本日から海上でのダストサンプリングを開始することといたしました。この意味合いは陸地ですと陸上ですと、蓄積した放射性物質の再付与、巻き上がりというのがあります。海の場合にはそういった影響が、減らせると考えますので、海上でのダストサンプリングを開始いたしました。
And also from today, we have started sampling of dust on the sea or in the sea area. The reason for this is because on the land, the radioactive material that has been accumulated on the land can be a kind of expanded or be scattered into the surrounding areas again by the wind and others. But that kind of effect can be reduced in the sea area. And that is why we started dust sampling in the sea area from today.
現在放出物質が原子力発電所からどれくらい放出されているかを評価することは大変重要ですので、こういったサンプリング結果をもとに、より精度を高めて評価していきたいと考えています。説明は以上です。
I believe that it is important to be able to get information regarding how much radioactive material is currently being released into the atmosphere. And therefore, based on the results of the sampling that I have just explained to you, we wish to be able to increase the accuracy of our assessment.
Now I'd like to ask Mr. Kawarada from MEXT to speak.
メクストの川原でございます。メクストからは放射線モニタリングの状況についてご説明を申し上げます。
I am Kawarada from MEXT, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, and I wish to explain to you the current situation regarding radioactive radiation monitoring.
先ほど森山さんの方からロードマップが今ステップ2に入ったというお話がありましたけど、我々モニタリングを担当しているものからするとステップ2に入ったということは、放出性物質が発電所側から大量に出てくるということはもう考えにくいということもありますので、放射線モニタリングの考え方をこれまで、いくら発電所から出ているかということを把握するということから、これまでどういうふうに出てきてどういう汚染状況になっているかというのを把握するということに移っているというふうに考えております。
Mr. Moriyama from NISA has explained earlier that we are now in step 2 in the roadmap. And for us who are responsible for monitoring the radioactive material, the fact that we are now in step 2 means that it is hard to believe that any large amounts of radioactive material will be released from the nuclear power plant. And therefore, we are now at a stage where we have moved from what we used to be doing up to now, which is to monitor how much radioactive material is being reduced, to focusing more on how that radioactive material has been released and what situation we are in now.
そういう観点から8月の初旬に、細野大臣をヘッドにしますモニタリング調整会議というのを関係各省で開きまして、関係各省それぞれ包括的にモニタリングをやると、役割分担を決めるということをやるとともに総合モニタリング計画というのを作りました。
And from that perspective, in the beginning of August, we have created a monitoring coordination conference headed by Minister Hosono and comprised of relevant ministries and agencies. And under this monitoring coordination conference, we will be undergoing a comprehensive monitoring with each ministries and agencies having their own role. And we will have a division of roles among the ministries and agencies concerned. And we have also formulated a comprehensive monitoring plan.
その中で今日はその中で、いくつかにつきまして、この資料に載っけておりますので、そのポイントのみについてご説明いたします。
And today, we have included in the material that we have distributed to you a number of points, and therefore, I would like to explain to you some of the main points.
第1点目はですね、緊急避難準備区域の解除に向けた放出線モニタリング、そのアクションプランの測定結果という題名のものであります。
One is regarding the readings and the results of radiation monitoring under the action plan towards the removal of the designation of emergency evacuation preparation areas.
これはまさに緊急避難準備区域をこれから解除していくわけでありますが、そのための判断になる判断になるモニタリングの値をモニタリングを実施しておるものでありまして、1、2、3というのを1ポツ2ポツ3ポツって書いてますが、子ども目線に立って学校でありますとか病院とかそういったものの敷地内のポイントのモニタリング、それから学校に至るまでの子どもたちが学校に至るあるいは公共施設に至るまでの通学路や公園といったもののモニタリング、それから市町村から要望が強かった詳細なモニタリング、こういうものを詳細に行ったその結果であります。
And going forward, we will be lifting the emergency evacuation preparation areas, and which means that we will be engaged in monitoring that can provide information that will be a basis for deciding on the lifting of the emergency evacuation preparation areas. And in this page paper, you see about the middle of the first page, numbers 1, 2, 3 in parentheses. And this means that we will be looking at the situation from the eye level of a child and decide on monitoring points within the premises of schools and hospitals, as well as monitoring points on the route that children will be traveling to school or to other public facilities. And also, we show here the results of detailed monitoring at the monitoring points that I have just mentioned, as well as at monitoring points for which there was a strong request from municipalities for monitoring.
説明が長くなりますもんですから2ページ目についてますからますように、それぞれ詳細にモニタリングをやりましたところのそれぞれの市村町のですね、モニタリングの最高値最低値がどれぐらいかという表になっています。これ具体的なポイントを地図に落としたものがウェブサイトを見ていただければ分かりますが50ページぐらいありますのでそれは割愛させていただいております。
And on the second page, you can see the results of the detailed monitoring that we did in the graph. And the graph shows the highest levels and the lowest levels in each of the cities, villages, and towns. And also, if you can visit our website, we have a map that actually includes the points that we monitored, but that would be about 50 pages, so I did not include that in the material I distributed to you.
これのポイントはですね、緊急時避難準備区域20キロから30キロの間にありますが、この緊急時避難準備区域の住民の方々がふるさとへのその帰還に向けたアクションをこれから政府が取るわけでありますが、その検討の資料の参考と検討の参考ということで行ったものであります。
And the points that we have been monitoring and the main point of the monitoring that we have been undertaken is to provide a reference for the consideration that the government will be giving from here onwards for the return of the residents in the evacuation preparation areas, which would be within a radius of 20 to 30 kilometers from the nuclear power station.
それから次は地図がいくつかついてますが、これは先ほど私言及しました総合モニタリング計画、各省が行います全体的な包括的モニタリング計画ですが、これに基づいて、詳細なモニタリングを行った結果を踏まえて作った放射線のいわゆるマップ、同図モニタリングマップと書いてますが、そのマップであります。
And moving on to the following pages, I have a number of maps that I have attached to the material. This is a map that has been created based on the results of the detailed monitoring that has been undertaken based on the comprehensive monitoring map, which I mentioned earlier, done by the various relevant ministries and agencies. And it is shown on top of the page as the dose monitoring map.
これは見方だけをちょっと申し上げますと、最初のものはですね、空間占領率のマップ、8月11日時点の空間占領率のマップで、単位はマイクロシーベルトパワーです。
And let me just explain to you how to read these maps. The first map is a map of the atmospheric radiation dose as of the 11th of August. And the units are in microsieverts per hour.
それでこの右下の方に書いてますが、それぞれ色が分かりにくいんですが、色が書いてまして、赤くなったところは放射線レベルが高くて、どんどん低くなっていっているものを等高線の形で書いたものです。
And as you can see the legend on the right-hand bottom, the levels of radiation are shown in the different colors. And the red color shows the highest level of radiation, and the level becomes lower as the color becomes lighter.
それから2ページ目がですね、要するに積算インテグレーテッドドーズマップ、積算線量マップで、この意味は、事故が起こった今年の3月11日からですね、1年後の来年24年度の3月11日までの積算線量を同じように等高線で書いたものです。
And the second page shows the integrated dose map. And what this means is that it shows in the map the integrated dose for the 1 year period from the 11th of March of this year to the 11th of March of next year, 2012.
それからその次のページはですね、事故が起こった今年の3月11日からですね、8月11日までの積算線量というものをマップにしたものがその次のものであります。
And the map on the following page is a integrated dose map for the period from the 11th of March through the 11th of August.
その特徴はですね、次のその6ページから6、7、8、9、10、11とそれぞれのポイントデータが細かなデータが載っておりますが、地図のですね4ページ目の地図、1年後のですね積算線量の地図を見ていただきながら、ポイントを申し上げますと、今回はですね、20キロ圏内のかなり放射線レベルが高いであろう警戒区域というところの放射線量の値を詳しく計測したものが載っているというのが特徴であります。
And if I may explain to you some of the characteristic of the material from pages 6 through 11, we have some very detailed data. For instance, if you take page 4, which shows the integrated dose level 1 year from now, and pick up those points, the graphs from page 6 through 11 shows the results of detailed monitoring of the emergency evacuation areas, which is an area within a radius of 20 kilometers from the nuclear power station, which is an area with a high level of radioactivity.
ちょっと説明を申し上げますと、8ページはですね、そのリストリクテッドエリアの50地点についてのデータが載っております。
And if I may further explain, page 8 shows the results of monitoring of 50 points in the restricted area.
その中で、いわゆる20ミリシーベルトを超えるような高い、エリアが、この50ポイント中35ポイントあるということがと、それから一番高いのは37と書いてますポイントですが、508.1 ミリシーベルトに達するという、それぐらい大きな線量に達するというのがポイントであります。
And for instance, of the points that were monitored in the restricted areas, of the 50 points monitored, there were 35 points where the radiation level exceeded 20 millisieverts. And also the highest monitoring point, which is shown as monitoring point 37, had a radiation level as high as 508.1 millisieverts.
それがこの、人数の見方であって、それからその、次がですね、13ページに行っていただきまして、
So that is, I just explained how to read these graphs. And can you move on to page 13?
今は福島原子力発電所から周辺のモニタリングの値だったんですが、さらにワイドなエリア、つまり周辺の県、最終的には東日本ぐらいがですね視野に据えて、どれぐらいのその汚染が広がっているかというのを計測するためにやっているのがこのエアボーンモニタリングであります。
The data that I have just explained was mainly data from the area surrounding the Fukushima nuclear power station. But what we show here on page 13 is a monitoring of a more wider area extending to the surrounding prefectures and basically covering the entire East Japan area. And this shows there is monitoring that has been done to show how much or how far the contamination has spread.
具体的に申し上げますと、福島以外にすでに終わってますのが宮城、茨城、栃木というのはすでにこのエアボーンモニタリングが終わっておりまして、このページ13ページの下にありますように、オーガスト8月に行いますのはここにあるような山形、福島県の西部ですね、それからその、群馬、新潟というのが8月中にやる予定になっているところであります。
And to be more specific, besides Fukushima Prefecture, prefectures like Miyagi, Ibaragi, and Tochigi, we have already finished this airborne wide area monitoring. And if you can look at the bottom of page 13, under future schedule, it shows that we are planning to complete the wide area airborne monitoring for Yamagata Prefecture, western part of Fukushima, Gunma, and Niigata Prefecture.
それからその9月、10月に行う予定になっていますのはそこに書いてありますような東日本をカバーするようなエリアであります。
And also on the very bottom of that page, you can also see the prefectures, which mainly cover the whole East Japan area, for which the wide area airborne monitoring is planned to be done in September and October.
こういうことをやることによって、要するに汚染マップといいますか、国際的によく言われている汚染マップというのが、分かってくると、詳細に分かってくるということになるんだろうと思われます。
In other words, by doing this kind of detailed monitoring, we will be able to create a clear contamination map.
それから15ページはこのエアボーンモニタリングで今これから、実施しよう、としております、群馬のモニタリング計画を書いてます。これはちょっと今説明したばかりなので飛ばしまして、17ページに参ります。
On page 15, we show the plan for the monitoring, which we are going to be undertaking for Gunma Prefecture, so I will skip over that and move on to page 17.
17ページは今陸上の説明したんですが、陸上と空の説明したんですが、海域のモニタリングです。
I have been explaining about the monitoring on the land and also from in the air. And page 17 shows the sea area monitoring.
これもモニタリング総合計画に従ってかなりワイドに包括的なポイント、たくさんのポイントでデータを取っておりますが、今17ページにありますのはこの海水表層、中中層、それから下層にある海水のですねモニタリングの値であります。
And we have been obtaining data from a wide area and from very comprehensive, large number of points based on the comprehensive monitoring plan. And page 17, it shows the readings of the sea area monitoring, including the outer layer, the middle layer, and the lower layer.
これもポイントはもう見て一目瞭然ですが、もうこの、半径30キロ以内のところのポイントについてはもうノンデテクタブルだということであります。
何のポイントはノンデテクタブルですか？発電所から30キロ圏以外のはもうノンデテクタブル。 And I think the results of the monitoring and the points you can see are self-explanatory, and it shows that in all the areas which is beyond a radius of 30 kilometers from the nuclear power station, the results all show non-detectable.
それからその次の18ページはですね、海水中はノンデテクタブルということなんですが、海底土ですね、についてはデータが出てきておりまして、ここに書いておりますようなデータであります。
On page 18, it shows that whereas the readings from the sea area monitoring has been non-detectable, on page 18 it shows the results of the radioactivity concentration in the soil at the bottom of the sea.
これは蓄積をされてこんなふうな値になっているんですが、それの経年変化もその後ろの、19ページからですね、22ページまでに変化が載っけておりますが、最初の第1回目っていうのがこれ5月27日のデータで発表したデータで、6回目というのが8月の13日に発表したデータということで、時系列の変化がここで載っけております。
It is probably that the radioactivity has been accumulating in the bottom of the sea, giving these readings. And from page 19 through 22, we show the values that show the trends over time. And the very first reading was taken and published on the 27th of May, and the 6th reading was taken on the 13th of August. And these shows the changes over time.
最後のページ、これは最後の説明ですが、最後は時々問題になりますストロンチウムの値、海底土におけるストロンチウムの値を計測しましたが、ここに書いて表にありますように、このポイントにおけるストロンチウムの値というのはノンデテクタブルだということです。
And the very last page, which will be my very last explanation, we have measured the levels of strontium, which is mentioned sometimes. And we have measured the levels of strontium in the soil in the bottom of the sea. And as you can see in all of the points that have been measured, strontium was non-detectable.
どうもありがとうございました。
That concludes my explanation.
Next, Mr. Eiichi YOKOTA of MHLW, please.
私の方からは厚生労働省の方に報告のありました食品中の放射性物質の検査結果について概要をご説明したいと思います。
Then I will explain the outline regarding the results of inspection of radioactive material in food, which has been undertaken by the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Labor.
お手元この横の表の紙ご用意いただければと思います。
Can you please refer to this two-page sidewise paper that we have distributed to you?
これまで延べで右下ですけども1万4000件以上のサンプルの方検査結果の方が得られておりまして、最近では冒頭四方さんからご説明ありました通り牛肉の問題を受けて、牛肉の検査件数とあと米の収穫時期が始まったということで米の検査の件数が多くなってきているというような状況でございます。
And as you can see on the right-hand bottom, cumulatively, we have results of inspection of more than 1,400 samples. And some recent trends show that since the issue of beef occurred, we have an increase in the number of beef samples that have been inspected. And also now that we are in the rice harvest season, there has been an increase in the number of rice samples that has been inspected.
最近1週間で暫定規制値を超過した食品につきましては、まず福島、栃木、岩手、宮城の牛肉、それから千葉のお茶がございました。
And now, food items that have exceeded the provisional regulation values during the past week included beef from Fukushima, Tochigi, Iwate, and Miyagi prefectures, and tea leaves from Chiba prefecture.
このうち福島、栃木、岩手の牛肉、それから千葉のお茶につきましては現在出荷制限の方がかかっております。
And of these food items which exceeded the provisional regulation values, those that are currently subject to restriction of shipment include beef from Fukushima, Tochigi, and Iwate prefectures, and tea leaves from Chiba prefecture.
それから宮城の牛肉につきましては8月19日に出荷制限一部解除されましたが、検査により安全性を確認したものが出荷されているところでございます。
And also for beef produced in Miyagi prefecture, on the 19th of August, the restriction of shipment has been lifted for part of the beef from Miyagi prefecture. And the beef for which the restriction has been lifted are all beef whose safety has been reconfirmed through inspection.
2ページ目以降が出荷制限の指示の一覧表でございます。
Page 2 onwards shows the list of foodstuffs, food that is now subject to restriction of distribution.
最近変更になったところは1箇所でございまして、3ページ目の宮城県の牛肉の欄でございます。
And there has been one change recently, which is on the column for beef from Miyagi prefecture.
そこの括弧の中が8月19日付で追加になった部分でございますけども、先ほどご説明しました通り、県の定める出荷検査方針に基づいて管理される牛については、出荷制限を解除したところでございます。
And the part that is shown in parentheses under meat for Miyagi prefecture is what has been added, or the change that has been made. And as I mentioned earlier, beef that is controlled through inspection measures that has been provided by the prefecture has been subject to lifting of the restriction of distribution.
私からは以上でございます。
That concludes my explanation.
Now, I'd like to ask my colleagues from MAFF to speak if you have any. Okay, then
The representative from the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestries, and Fisheries says that he has nothing in particular to explain.
okay, then I would like to open the floor for questions. Please limit your question to one and identify yourself. Chris.
Süddeutsche Zeitung, Germany, Neidhardt. Question about radioactive waste. There has been an SI report that there are secret dumps in the mountains of Fukushima where even the residents do not know that there is radioactive sludge dumped there. Can you confirm that, or if you don't confirm that, I take it as a confirmation. And then there is a report that there's a rule that sludge from radioactive sludge with contamination of above 8,000 becquerel is not supposed to be burned, is incinerated. Now there's a report that you allow mixing of lower and higher radioactive sludge so that the average radiation goes below 8,000, and then you do allow to burn it. This would mean that you do not care much about the general radiation, just about the peak radiation. So you would just spread radiation to a wider area. Now, if this mixing is allowed, why would the Japanese people assume that such mixing is not done with foodstuff as well? Thank you.
ドイツ新聞ですけれども、放射性廃棄物に関してなんですけれども、一部の報告では、福島の山中に、秘密裏に、放置されている、あるいは廃棄されているという報告がありますが、周辺の住民はそこに廃棄されていることを知らないという報告がありますけれども、この点、まず確認していただけますでしょうか。それと、ルールとして、8000ベクレル以上の放射性廃棄物、放射性物質を含んだ汚泥は焼却してはならないというルールがありますが、一部の報告では低レベルの放射性の汚泥と高レベルの放射性汚泥を混ぜることによって8000ベクレル以内にその平均値を下げて焼却を認めているという報告がありますけれども、そうしますとピークの放射能レベルにしか関心がなくて、全体的な放射能レベルよってより広く放射能が拡散することには特に注意を払ってないという意味になりますけれども、放射性汚泥でこういうことをなさっているということは、食品でも同様のことが行われているかもしれないと、国民が排除できないんではないでしょうか。もうどなたがご担当か分かりませんが、森山さんではないかと思うんですが。
Okay, let me just touch upon some of the issues. I guess your question relates to the Japanese government's policy on decontamination in general, and whether it is debris or sludges or, as you mentioned, food items. There is the discussion going on in terms of coming up with a basic policy on decontamination, and this is something which we are aiming to compile by the end of this month. And in this context, we would be, coming up with a clearer policy in terms of how we would reduce the radiation levels and how we would promote decontamination in various sense, including, as I understand, issues of treatment of the contaminated soil or debris, and who would be responsible for that kind of treatment. I guess the national government would be playing a very important role, and also the issues like how we would come up with rather long-term measures in order to address this issue. So our aim is, of course, we would realize the reduction of radiation levels as much as possible, and of course, this relates to the issue of return of the residents to the restricted areas where they used to live before. So this is something that we are discussing, and the basic background for this is we need to address we need to monitor actual radiation level, and as was explained by Mr. Kawarada, the government is intensifying its efforts to do as comprehensive monitoring as possible. And in relation to your kind of case that the treatment of debris or soil and connection with the food items, as I explained at the outset, we are treating the food safety issues with utmost priority, and in my initial presentation I touched upon the issue of beef or rice, but this is something which we are making our best to ensure the food safety of the produce coming from affected areas.
But that means so far you don't know who is responsible, what government institution is responsible for radioactive waste, and is that as I report about secret dumps too?
でもそうすると放射性廃棄物に関しては誰が責任を負っているのか、あるいはどこの政府機関が責任を負っているのかをご存じないということを意味しますし、今申し上げたような周りの住民がに知らせずに秘密裏に放置するということにもつながるんではないでしょうか。
Of course, regarding the treatment of or disposal of radioactive waste and the debris, this is the issues under the jurisdiction of a Nuclear Safety Commission, as well as the Environment Ministry, and they have been tackling this issue. And what I'm talking about is to step up, the government's role in resolving those remaining issues, which we regard as very important issues.
Then I would like to get an answer from Mr. Moriyama about mixing the radioactive sludge.
そうしましたら森山さんの方から放射性汚泥をその低レベルのものと高レベルのものを混ぜて平均を引き下げるということが行われているという報告があったということに関して森山さんの方からご意見いただけますか。
先ほどありましたように放射性物質の処分は環境省で見ておりますので、保安院としてはその事実は確認していません。ただし放射性廃棄物の処理処分の基本的な考え方は濃度のレベルに応じた処理をすると、処分をするということですから、基本的には平均濃度で処分をするということが基本ではないかと思います。それは先ほど指摘のあった食品の問題とは全く別問題だというふうに考えています。
As was mentioned earlier, it is the Ministry of Environment that is responsible for disposing of radioactive waste. And so our organization, the Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency, NISA, has not confirmed the fact that you have mentioned. However, having said so, regarding the basic approach for disposing of radioactive waste, the basic approach is to dispose of radioactive waste in accordance with the level of contamination of the waste. And so basically it would mean that we will be dealing with the average level of radioactivity of the waste in question. And this would be completely different with food.
Peter?
Peter Kouhei, German Radio ARD. During the weekend, the chief of the power plant, Fukushima Daiichi, admitted that one of his workers manually shut down the emergency cooling system for the reactor number 1. And it was just the chief of the Daiichi plant didn't know that. Could you elaborate what kind of results this had? Or on the other hand, what can you say what happens if this would not be done by the worker, not to shut down the emergency cooling system for the reactor number 1? Thank you.
Excuse me, can you give your affiliation? ドイツラジオ ARD のものですけれども、福島第一原子力発電所の所長が認めたこととして、原子炉1号機の緊急冷却装置を作業員の一人がその手で自動ではなくて手で止めてしまったということを認めており、それを所長は知らなかったということを認めておられますけれども、この結果としてどういうことになったのか、それのもたらした結果について、詳しくお話しいただけますでしょうか。あるいはむしろ、もしそのように手動で緊急冷却装置1号機の緊急冷却装置を止めるということが行われていなかった場合にはどういうことが起こったと思われますでしょうか。
実際にどういうことが行われていたかについては事故調査委員会で調査をされていまして、先ほどお話があった点はその一部の情報だと思います。それでお話のあった非常用冷却装置というのはアイソレーションコンデンサーだと思いますけれども、これは、通常の何て言いますか非常用冷却装置ではなくて、温度を除去するものですので、ある程度その温度の低下、具体的には1時間あたり55度というその温度の低下状況を見ながら動かしたり切ったりするというのが、通常の運転だと考えています。
The Accident Investigation Committee is now in the process of investigating what actually happened. And the point that you have raised is probably part of that information. Now, when you say the emergency cooling system, I believe you mean the isolation condenser. And this isolation condenser is not an emergency cooling system as you would normally describe it, but rather it is a system that is used to remove the temperature. And to be more specific, it removes temperature by 55 degrees per hour. And therefore, the normal operation of this isolation condenser is to switch it on and off depending on the temperature.
それでこのアイソレーションコンデンサーがもし働いていたらどうかというところについて今明確にですね申し上げるだけの情報というか知識は持ち合わせていませんがいずれにしてもその 津波によって全電源が喪失をすると。このアイソレーションコンデンサのその操作は津波が来る前の操作ですが、津波が来た後すべての電源が喪失をして、いますので、やはり炉心の損傷ということはその段階でも全電源が喪失した段階で、かなりの確率で予想されただろうと思います。
And in response directly to your question about what would have happened if the isolation condenser was operating, I do not have the information as well as the knowledge to be able to say anything for sure at this point right now. But in any event, all the power source was lost as a result of the tsunami. And what you mentioned about the operation or otherwise of the isolation condenser is only the period prior to the tsunami. And therefore, when the tsunami came, all the power source was lost in any event. So I believe in any event, it could be presumed with a pretty high level of probability that the damage would have been done to the reactor core in any case.
ホワインではこのアイソレーションコンデンサーは、3月11日の夜の段階で作動中であるという報告を東京電力から受けていましたが、その3月11日の夜の段階で、遅い時間帯ですけども、このまま冷却、注水ができない状態が続くと炉心損傷に至る可能性があるという認識は当時から持っていました。
As of late night on the 11th of March, NISA has received a report from TEPCO that the isolation condenser was operating. And that was pretty late in the night on the 11th of March. But even at that stage, we did have the recognition that if the cooling could not be continued, or if the water injection could not be continued, there would be a possibility of damage to the reactor core.
私からの説明は以上です。
That's all from me.
John Boyd with IEEE Spectrum magazine. This is a question too for Moriyama-san. This is about thermal power plants. Recently they've come under a lot of strain because they've had to work over their normal time periods because of the summer heat. And there have been 8 suspensions so far, according to the Japanese media. Okay, we're getting towards the end of the summer now, but we will be heading into the winter period when demand will increase again. At that time, there's likely to be more nuclear reactors closed down, either because of suspensions for inspections or perhaps because of the stress test, failing the stress tests. Given then that we could have a more serious situation in the winter, I wonder what NISA or the government is doing in preparation for high winter demand when these thermal power plants will come under even more stress and probably more closures. Thanks.
IEEE スペクトラム誌のボイドと申しますけれども、森山さんにお尋ねします。これは火力発電所についてなんですけれども、夏の暑い時期に対応するために、最近では火力発電所がいつもよりもストレスがかかっていて、通常よりも長い時間稼働しているという状況で、その結果8機が運転を停止したということが日本の報道で伝えられております。 夏の暑い時期ももうそろそろこれで終わりになりますので、夏に関してはそれでいいでしょうけれども、これからまた冬の寒い時期がやってきて、その頃には、原発は今以上に定期点検とかあるいはストレステストに合格できなかった等々の理由で今以上の原発が停止するようなことがあれば、冬の時期は今以上に深刻な状況になり、火力発電所もストレスというか、オーバーワークに今以上になって、その結果停止する火力発電所も今以上に出てくるんじゃないかと思うんですけれども、こういった今後の冬の時期に備えて何か保安院としては何か今手当といいますか取り組みをされているんでしょうか。
原子力安全保安院は規制機関ですので、安全を見る機関ですので、その需給について、はタッチしていません。需給を増やすような努力というのは保安院の仕事ではありません。しかしながらストレステストを導入して、定期検査が終わって、起動準備ができたものについてはストレステストの報告があるはずですから、そういう場合には保安院としては可能な限り速やかに評価をするように努力したいと考えています。以上です。
NISA is an organization that is responsible for regulation and ensuring the safety of nuclear power stations. So we are not involved in the supply and demand of power, and any effort to increase the supply or balance the supply and demand is not part of our work. But in any event, the stress test will be undertaken, and there will be nuclear power plants that would have completed their periodic inspection and will be ready for restarting operation. And when the results of their stress test come to us at such a time, NISA on its part will make every effort for the smooth and quick resumption of operation of these nuclear power stations.
Let me just add in relation to your question. There have been meetings called Energy and Environment meeting, which has been held at the Prime Minister's office, joined by Minister of National Policy Unit and METI Minister, so Minister Genbai and Minister Kaeda. And there have been discussions of the medium or short to medium term energy supply and demand prospects, and what kind of measures the government as a whole would be able to introduce. And there is some assumption being made, as you mentioned, in relation to operations of nuclear power plants and what's going to happen to demand and supply situation with regard to power, for example, next summer. So as you have seen, there have been a very strong campaign being implemented during this summertime, and I'm sure that especially under METI Agency of Natural Resources, the Energy Agency would come up with another the kind of campaign to save consumption of energy if during the winter time there is a very severe the demand and supply situation related to power. So this is ongoing discussion, and as if we see a very serious demand and supply situation regarding power in relation to the winter season, we would take the appropriate actions. Okay.
Süddeutsche Zeitung, Neidhardt once more. There have been reports from California that they observed sulfur 35 in California. Sulfur 35 is a product of sodium when a nutrient hits sodium, then it becomes sulfur 35. This sulfur 35 is supposed to be coming from Fukushima, and it has been suggested that this is a hint that there was weak criticality after the first meltdowns, because at the moment of weak criticality you would have the production of sulfur 35. So my question to Mr. Moriyama is, do we have any hint from the Japanese side that you ever had or did not have weak criticality after the first meltdowns? And question for Mr. Kawarada, has anybody ever thought of measuring sulfur 35 in Japan? Thank you.
ドイツ新聞、南ドイツ新聞です。南ドイツ新聞ですが、カリフォルニアからの報告で、サルファー35が観測されたという報告が来ております。サルファー35というのは when what hits sodium? ニュートロン。中性子がナトリウムとぶつかった時にできる成分がサルファー35ということで、このカリフォルニアで観測されたサルファー35は福島からのものであるということです。で、そうしますとこれは最初のメルトダウンの後に再び再臨界が起こったんではないかということを示唆するものなんです、けれども、なぜかと言いますと、この再臨界が起こる瞬間にサルファー35が生成されると言われているからです。ですので、森山さんに伺いたいんですが、日本側で最初のメルトダウンの後再臨界が起こったかどうかという見解は、日本側としてはどういう見解なのか、それと川原田さんに伺いたいんですけれども、日本でどなたかサルファー35を測定しようと考えた、あるいは考えている方はいらっしゃらないんでしょうか。
再臨界について、再臨界が起こったというようなデータはありません。ただし、その臨界というその現象は非常に局所的に見れば起こらないとは言い切れないところがありますので、その科学的物理的にゼロかと言われたら分かりませんけども、通常検出できる程度の状態で、臨界再臨界が起こったというデータはありません。
We do not have any data that shows the occurrence of recriticality. Having said so, however, I would not be able to totally rule it out because rule out a phenomena of criticality in a very limited location, in a very limited location. So so I am not sure whether the possibility of recriticality is really zero, scientifically and physically speaking. However, we do not have any data that shows any occurrence of recriticality in an order or under a situation that can be normally detected.
それから森山さんの説明で再臨界はもうほとんどこれはもう考えられないというような説明だったと思うんですが、だとするとその再臨界から起こりうるという説明のそのサルファ35ですか、を注目している人はまず 私は聞いたことがないというのが今の状況です。
Then from Mr. Kawarada, I believe Mr. Moriyama's explanation was, in essence, that recriticality is not conceivable, which would mean that the same can be said regarding sulfur 35, and I have not heard of anybody that is giving attention to sulfur 35, which, as you mentioned, is created as a result of recriticality.
Okay, then we'd like to conclude today's briefing. Thank you very much for coming.